Now, in his commentary, Sri Aurobindo takes us into this. But Indra does not turn back from the quest like Agni and Vayu. He pursues his way through the highest ether of the pure mentality, and there he approaches the woman, capital W, the many shining Uma Haimavati. From her he learns that this demon is the Brahman, by whom alone the gods of mind and life and body, in whom alone they are great. And so our powers, psychological powers, the divine deities working in us, grow into greatness when they realize they're Brahman and live in the Brahman and by the Brahman. Now, Sri Aurobindo explains here, who is this Uma? Uma is the supreme nature from whom the whole cosmic action takes its birth. She is the pure summit and highest power of the One who here shines out in many forms. From this supreme nature, which is also the supreme consciousness, the gods must learn their own truth. They must proceed by reflecting it in themselves to their own lower movement. For she has the knowledge and consciousness of the One. So the rest of it we will see later, but here we must pause and enter more deeply into this. Uma is the supreme nature. And what does that mean? What do you mean by supreme nature versus something else which is not supreme nature? And so we come to a vocabulary here which we find in the Veda through symbols and names, in the Bhagavad Gita more clearly stated in distinction of terms which Sri Aurobindo elaborates upon. The distinction is of what may be called a lower nature and a higher nature. And the difference is this: the lower nature is still a power of the divine working which has forgotten its origin, which has forgotten its oneness, forgotten its divinity, and works in a mechanically repeating movement. All that we see in the universe is the working of this apara, lower, not transcendent, not liberated, Prakriti, nature. The word itself, Prakriti, which creates, which forms with special focus. And so we see all of this, which is universe, is apara Prakriti, lower nature. And suggesting that there is a higher nature where the same power is working liberated, free, knowing her oneness, knowing her divinity as a conscious creative power. From that highest to the lowest, there is a continuum. There are degrees and gradations of self-loss as she enters into degrees of self-forgetfulness, until in the depth of matter, she forgets her divinity and becomes a pure, mechanical, repeating energy. It is this we meet in our physics. It is here that we discover all reality appears to be only form. And that is the domain of Agni. Formation, creating form where there was none by this power to organize and creating, repeating energetic worlds of movement. Slightly higher, we find the same nature, not bound in form, but a free energy. An energy which is able to seize form, reside inside form, but can also flow without being bound to form. And this is the domain of Vayu. But still higher is the conceptive power of the nature as she conceives the forms in which she energizes herself. And this is the domain of Indra. Beyond Indra is this domain where we know her as she knows herself, as supreme nature, which is also the gods, from which the gods must learn their whole truth, their own truth. It is from here that the whole cosmic action takes its birth. And so she is on the summit, the pure summit and highest power of the One who here shines out in many forms. So at that point, her peak position is therefore as a peak suggestive of the mountains, the peaks of the mountains, and the pure summit suggestive of the snow on the peaks of the mountains, and therefore daughter of the snowy peaks. But still we may ask, why snowy peaks? Why the Himalayas as the term? And there is something deeper that we discover. And it is a question of the experience. The Vedic rishis used these terms because they saw them, they perceived them, experience, and so used that vocabulary. In the human experience, as we look from below, from the consciousness below, towards the domains of the higher ranges of the cosmos, towards the Satchidananda, one begins to glimpse it in terms which we can only have in our consciousness here. One begins to glimpse it at first as a pure, white, crystalline, snowy reality. And therefore, automatically, the image of snow on the heights and the peaks of the Himalayas resonates with that experience. She who emerges out of that consciousness and becomes the supreme nature is therefore daughter of the snowy peaks, daughter of the Himalayas. Now again we go deeper into that story of Parvati as daughter of Himavan. Remember, before Parvati she was Sati, struggling to attain to the same Shiva. And again he would spurn her. At that time, in that incarnation, she was not daughter of Himavan. Daksha, if you remember the story, and the vocabulary tells you what that means. Daksha Prajapati is the son of Brahma. Brahma is the creator, but he is the son of that, and his rule is organizing the laws, setting in place the structures by which society becomes society. Otherwise, you would have chaos of living beings. He organizes the living beings to create a society. He sets the rules of conduct, what is right and what is forbidden. And it is he who creates civilization. But if you go back to the full, deeper sense of it, Prajapati, Lord of the peoples. He presides over the organizations of the peoples. And here we find rule, law, structure, organization. And of him, she is the daughter as Sati. And so that representing the lower nature, which is bound in structure, organization, and repetitive rhythms, forbidden to break out of that structure. And every time she yearns for the Lord, he prevents her because he looks at Shiva and says, that one is the breaker of rules. I am Lord of rules. How can my daughter marry him who is the very opposite of me? He prevents her. But every time his presence appears, it shakes up the order of his world. And he is unable to prevent. Eventually, she does marry him, but he warns her, you are not pure enough because you are made of the 5 elements. You belong to lower nature. My domain is beyond the 5 elements. And she cannot grasp that. She cannot recognize that limitation. And at the end, the result is, in her attempt to be with him and unite with him, she is consumed by the fire. The breaking down of all forms which extinguishes that experience of form. And she is now reborn as daughter of Himavan, of the higher nature. And there, her relationship with the Lord, she again continues the journey, not begins afresh, continues from where she left off. Again, she seeks to realize the Lord, but now in a more steady and concentrated pursuit, without that anxiety, without that intense agitation of her quest, of her yearning, and the struggle of the inability to reach. Here she goes through a pursuit which is steady, conscious, and she is taught by him the yoga by which she is purified and made ready to unite with the Lord. Now you can see in that whole story the journey of evolution of nature from her lowest rigid order to her higher and higher forms and freedom until in the highest, when she unites with the Lord, she is now the consort of Shiva, his power, his Shakti, his energy pouring out to become the world. She is also known as Parvati of the mountains, Parvata being mountain, Parvati, or Haimavati of the snowy peaks of Himavan, both names suggesting that higher domain, and then the name Uma. Uma Haimavati is also important. Now just review, come back to Uma shortly, review the sense of this when you read Sri Aurobindo's commentary. In the highest ether of the pure mentality, he approaches the woman, the many shining Uma Haimavati. From her he learns that this demon is the Brahman. Uma is the supreme nature from whom the whole cosmic action takes its birth. She is the pure summit and highest power of the one who here shines out in many forms. From this supreme nature, which is also the supreme consciousness, the gods must learn their own truths because they are also emerging from there. We come now to the question of the name Uma. And the etymology here is not so obvious. It is perhaps even suggestive of many different images. One of the references which I found was simply light, perhaps of that domain, from the domain of the daughter of Hima, the snowy peaks, is light, perhaps. But if you go into the sound itself, Uma, you will notice it could be equally like from Himavan it becomes Haimavati, from Parvata it becomes Parvati. Uma could also be from Om, she is Uma, she who is of the Om. And remember, this domain is also that original vibration of the creative ether. Of that, she is the daughter. Suggestive. And then the sound itself, the Uma, you will see even in the English language, woman is as if originating from Uma. But the sound quality of the Uma, and if you see its similarity with Bhuma of the earth, has a sense of wideness, the sense of containing, the sense of whole, but from U to Ma. And U having the sense of something narrow as a receptacle, like a womb from which the whole emerges. So in the etymology of the pure sound, if you go back to the root sounds, there is this sense of the movement of birthing from a core receptacle to the wide embracing. And that is the sense of Uma. In the combination, therefore, Uma Haimavati, you have a clear sense of one who is the origin from which everything emerges. Uma is the supreme nature from whom the whole cosmic action takes its birth. And so Sri Aurobindo's commentary captures precisely these nuances and the sense of the birth, because everything is born from her, from the U. And not only there is this movement of the birth from her, there is the other side. She is the pure summit and highest power of the one who here shines out in many forms. And the whole sense of the multiplicity of the higher nature, all possible forms, as if are illuminations, light of her. And that's when the sense of Uma is light. All these meanings which we looked at, the shades of meanings, they're all held in this description. From this supreme nature, which is also the supreme consciousness, the gods must learn their own truths. And now comes the relationship with all the things which are manifested, including the powers of the divine working here, who no more know their origin. They must come back to that origin, recognize their link with the origin, and from that connection learn of themselves. How do they do that? They must proceed by reflecting it in themselves, instead of limiting themselves to their own lower movement. Now, here the operation of the gods is described in the lower nature. And in lower nature, as with all lower nature, they are identified with their own limitation. This is all I am, this is all I can do. And when they reconnect to the source in the higher nature, at that point, they do not become that instantly. There is a connection, and through the connection, they must learn to reflect. And it is her power in them which now grows through that reflection. So they must proceed by reflecting it in themselves instead of limiting themselves to their own lower movement. Now this, if you take in its practical yogic implication, it means every power in us is at present a limited movement of a limited capacity because it knows its own limitation and is bound to it. The moment that power becomes conscious that there is a greater source, a nation or a representative, the moment it then accepts to enter in relation with that, a link forms in which, if it can accept to reflect, that means it must give itself, open itself, accept to reflect, become still to allow for a perfect reflection. Then that begins to act, and one grows rapidly free from the limitations by the fact that the original power of which you are a limitation begins to fill and lead your working. Now, all of the powers within us, all our psychological faculties must thus be stilled, turned, and opened to the direct action of the Divine Mother. You can take it in this way as a slow yogic process of turning consciously part by part, operation by operation, each of these faculties, or you can simply take up the whole of your being to whatever extent you're conscious and open in this way. These are only distinctions of process. For she has the knowledge and consciousness of the One, while the lower nature of mind, life, and body can only envisage the many. So here is the fundamental limitation. All these lower workings can only look at the many pieces. They cannot perceive the underlying oneness because that's how they are formed, as limited operations. She has the knowledge of the oneness, and when you open to her, it is that oneness which begins to unveil in you. Although, therefore, Indra, Vayu, and Agni are the greatest of the gods, the first coming to know the existence of the Brahman, the others approaching and feeling the touch of it, yet it is only by entering into contact with the Supreme Consciousness and reflecting its nature, and by the elimination of the vital, mental, physical egoism, so that their whole function shall be to reflect the One and Supreme, that Brahman can be known by the gods in us and possessed. So the whole thing is encapsulated in this one sentence. You can approach, you can know, have the first contact, but that's not enough. You have to enter into contact with the Supreme Consciousness, reflecting its nature, eliminating the egoism, which is the limiting character of your identity, on all three levels, vital, mental, and physical. The whole function, therefore, of your consciousness beginning to reflect the One and Supreme, it is by such a process and in such a state that you can know the Brahman and possess the Brahman. So the essence of the whole yogic process is captured in this one statement. All the rest is really how to get to this and how to deepen this. The conscious force that supports our embodied life must become simply and purely a reflector of the supreme consciousness and power. The life must become reflector and the mind design itself, and so on. He discusses now the specifics. Before we proceed to that, we must look at one more text where Sri Aurobindo refers to this term, Uma Haimavati, but gives us a further elaboration of not just Uma, but also the larger working of what may be described as the divine energies. And it is in a text which is part of the new volume that he discusses the gods of the Veda, having described the overall framework of the Vedic conception of the universe and our place in it. It is in the first chapter, he begins. He's going to describe Saraswati and the great ocean. But before he gets to her, he sets the base for why there are feminine deities and masculine deities in the Vedic conception. What is that distinction representing? He begins thus. One of the greatest deities of the Vedic pantheon is a woman, Jna. Simply Jna, the sound. A feminine power, whether of material or moral nature, whether her functions work in the subjective or the objective. Now, why is he referring to this? He quickly gives you a perspective of the place of the feminine through various traditions. The Hindu religion has always laid an overpowering stress on this idea of the woman in nature. It is not only in the Purana that the woman, capital W, looms so large. Not only in the Shakta cult that she becomes a supreme name. In the Upanishads also, it is only when Indra, in his search for the mysterious and ill-understood mastering Brahman, meets with a woman in the heaven of things, that he is able to learn of the thing which he seeks. So he is describing now across the various stages of the Indian traditions, we find this nature always described in the feminine first. And everything is nature finally. The Purusha, the pure consciousness, only watches and supports, at best reflects. Everything which is created is Prakriti, nature. The name, as we mentioned earlier, Prakriti, Kriti, forming, with focus, with intention, deliberately forming everything. And then in the Puranas, we have similarly this aspect of the feminine, which is so prominent. In the Shakta cult, she becomes the supreme. You cannot realize the divine unless you realize his power and the divine mother as his power. It is she who leads you to the divine. It is she who transforms you and makes you a fit receptacle for the divine. It is she who mediates. She knows both the divine and you. She is the divine energy, the divine will who forms you and leads your life, overtly or secretly. And therefore she is the means by which you realize the Lord. And she becomes the supreme name. And then in the Upanishads, he brings this text which we have been studying. Indra does not find the Lord except through her. So the full text goes like this. It is in the Upanishads. It is only when Indra, in his search for the mysterious and ill-understood mastering Brahman, meets with the woman in the heaven of things. Tasminneva kashe striyam ajagama umam haimavatim. In that same sky he came to the woman, Uma, daughter of Himavan, that he is able to learn the thing which he seeks. The Stri. Now here is another term for the woman. Stri, which is the term used in the Kena text. The Aja, or unborn female energy. Very interesting. So she is described as Stri. Ajagama. He came upon her who is Aja. Unborn. Ja is birth, born. Aja, not born. So she is described as Stri Aja. Unborn woman, unborn female energy. Is the executive divinity of the universe. The womb, the mother, the bride, the mold, and instrument of all joy and being. Now, each of these is a facet of her, and each of these terms is in fact referred to or used in the Vedic text. But you see each of these facets. The unborn female energy. In other words, she was never put out by someone. She was always there because he was there. She is his energy, inseparable from him, and therefore, if he is unborn, she is also unborn. All other than her. But she is the unborn female energy. Is the executive divinity of the universe, as distinct from the conceptive divinity. He, as Lord who conceives of the universe and the experiences, she executes what he conceives and moves into manifestation. Now, this concept of the conceiving and executive is very interesting to explore in many ways. One doesn't have to make the distinction at all. One could say there is only one being. In the text on Friday that we had been studying, you have Sri Aurobindo uniting the passive Brahman and the active Brahman into a single being who is ever unchanging but ever moving in the manifestation. It is he that went forth, the Isha Upanishad says. But even as he went forth to become the whole universe, he remained always pure, effortless, perfect, unblemished. So this double aspect is how the mind perceives that which is otherwise indivisible. But the mind needs to perceive in this double aspect, because otherwise we cannot appreciate how the movement emerges and their play. So the text in the Kashmir Shaivism, there is a beautiful description of how this takes place. When the Lord chooses to move into manifestation, all that he is in potential, unmanifest. As he moves, there's the first movement of his will. Well, there is first the movement of his delight, and the delight is what leads to the choice, the will to become. And as he moves on the brink of moving, he has not yet moved, just the will, on the brink of moving, he pauses. Because if he moves, he will lose his poise of liberty, of freedom, of unchanging, equal peace. And so he pauses. And instead, the movement continues as his energy. It's very interesting and very suggestive, showing us how our mind can grasp this double status. In its delight, willing, but the will turning to movement is as if the separation, or the point of separation. But it's never really separate, because it is always him. And then we have this double aspect of the cosmos. So in the text we are reading, the executive divinity of the universe. And at that point, we can conceive of this play between them. He conceives, she executes. And when she executes, it is for his delight. But they're never really separate. It is his delight which is her executive power. So as a result, she is not only the executive divinity, she is also the one who originates it all, the womb. So in the temple, you will notice, we have discussed this on other occasions, the vocabulary used as you enter the Indian temple, there's a long passage where the divine presence is seated. That passage is the, so to say, reversal, approaching the origin. And the sanctum sanctorum, which is the Latin term actually, which is the most sacred, is in Sanskrit, Garbha Griha. Garbha meaning womb, Griha home. So it is the womb out of which everything emerges. So outside that sanctum sanctorum, you have the forms. Often they will have some symbolic number of pillars, 108, 1,000, representing the multiplicity of the manifestation. But all of that is centered upon this core within. And within the core, no pillar, no light, no form, only darkness. The unmanifest from where everything emerges. And it is, except that when you approach it with the fire of your aspiration. You light the lamp. And it is in response to your aspiration that you have a perception of him, a glimpse. According to your need, your perception of him is what you see. In that which is otherwise free of all form. And so this is the womb from which everything pours out. There are many symbols around this. We need not go into detail, but the idea of the womb here. The mother. Now the womb is only the originating point. When the universe is born, it is she who nourishes the universe. Because it is she who pours herself to become everything. What is the child as emerging from the mother? Part of her body, never really separate. And because she is the one who is all energy, all time, her movement, all substance in the universe is herself, nourished by her. Is the ultimate mother, the divine mother. And as a mother, she nourishes everything to help it to grow. And therefore leads the whole evolutionary process by her nourishment. And as a mother, she draws the whole universe to her heart with her love. So we've seen three aspects: executive divinity of the universe, the womb, the mother, and now comes the bride. Because from within the universe, when we look towards her, we see not only her, we see him. We see the Lord of whom she is the power, and therefore she is the bride of the Lord. And the mold. Because within her, all the forms are as if held as an imprint from which they are imprinted upon the world. The mold from which she casts everything into form. And the mold, you will notice, unlike the form, is free of the form. It holds the potency of creating the form, but itself is not. It is outside the form. And so within her is this imprint with which she casts things into form. And so the mold and instrument. Instrument of all joy and being. All that he chooses to manifest, she is the instrument for its actualization. All being comes from her and all joy comes from her. So we read the same text and appreciate now the full impact of it. The Stri, the Aja, or unborn female energy, is the executive divinity of the universe, the womb, the mother, the bride, the mold, an instrument of all joy and being. Now this is Nya, one, the female. But the Veda also speaks of the Nyaha, the women, plural. The feminine powers without whom the masculine are not effective for work and formation. For when the gods are to be satisfied, who support the sacrifice and effect it, Vahanaya Yajatraha. Then Medatithi of the canvas, the rishi, calls on Agni to yoke them with female mates. Patni Vatas Kridhi, in their activity and enjoyment. So the rishi asks Agni to yoke each of the deities who is invoked in the Vedic ritual, to yoke them with their female mates in their activity and enjoyment. When the gods are satisfied as a result of the invocation, when they are to be satisfied in the and to be effective. In one of his greatest hymns, the 22nd of the first mandala, he speaks expressly of the Patnir Devanam, the brides of the strong ones, who are to be called to extend protection, to breathe a mighty peace, to have their share in the joy of the Soma wine. And now come three terms. You remember Indra, Varuna, and Agni? So here he says, Indrani, Varunani, Agnayi. We can recognize these goddesses and their mastering gods. So for each deity, for each power in the cosmos put out from the source, there is this feminine aspect. And the suggestion here is this, that when the Lord pours himself as his energy, when he pours as energy, he is energy. And therefore, in all the forms and movements of the energy, his consciousness is present, supporting her. So he does not just remain aloof beyond outside space and time, it is he who flows with her, supporting as she pours. If you conceive of it in this way, the energy flowing could not flow if there was not a support, and the support could not express if it was not energized. So the two can never be separated. It is only a question of the balance. So in the flow, he is still present, immanent in her flow, supporting her flow at each moment. And every time that she forms a special aspect of her flow, a special power, special quality of energy, a special color of her light, he is present. And so depending on how we choose to see, we can see him that she manifests in these special streams of light. They are the gods. And each of those activating himself, energizing himself, has this special power of energizing from each of those aspects. So we see the original movement of the double play replicating itself in forms, in all the activities, again and again and again. And the major aspects of the working are the gods and their consorts, energy streams, and each one of us plays the same double role. Within us is the pure consciousness, witness, observer, supporter, even enjoyer, the Purusha, and the full play of the energy whirling, Prakriti. But the two are split, they are separated. It is only when the Purusha awakens to his full divinity and liberates the energy from her fallen, bound condition of limitation, that she recovers her divinity, he recovers his divinity, and they unite within us, that we have the full divine manifestation. And so this unification which is being described here of the female deities brought together with the masculine powers, this aspect of unification of these two. And so this is where the text moves to a different direction. He mentions now there are three, in addition to Mother Earth, who seem to stand on a different level and are mentioned without the names of their mates, if they have any, and seem to enjoy an independent power and activity. They are Ila, Mahi, and Saraswati, the three goddesses born of love or born of bliss. And then he goes on to elaborate who is Saraswati. So we do not need to follow the text further. But here is a very interesting description of this double play and the importance of Stri, Gnya, or the Aja, unborn energy, which completes our deeper understanding of Uma Haimavati. the many shining. And so this text acquires a much deeper connotation after this background. And you will see in the verse, just in passing, the mention of these terms is enough to draw all this knowledge to the front, help us to appreciate more deeply her role and why it is to her that Indra has to turn and what she reveals to him. She said to him, "It is the eternal." Now remember, here the speech is not just a throwing of ideas. Indra has crossed the threshold of ideas. Ideas have failed. He's already in the ether of pure awareness. So what she's revealing to him is a direct imprint of the experience, not just a word play of words and ideas. So her speech here is a revelatory speech imprinting an experience. It is the eternal. Of the eternal is this victory in which ye shall grow to greatness. So the future sense, future tense is to point out that as you grow to awareness of the eternal, your greatness will grow. And the text goes, then alone he came to know that this was the Brahman. Again, the affirmation that only through her that this knowledge can be received. The next verse simply goes, therefore are these gods, as it were, beyond all the other gods, even Agni and Vayu and Indra, because they came nearest to the touch of that. Third verse, therefore is Indra, as it were, beyond all the other gods, because he came nearest to the touch of that, because he first knew that it was the Brahman. You see, the repetition here is very important. In the second verse, all these three came nearest to the touch of that. And then in the fourth, it is Indra who came nearest to the touch of that. The full sense of this and how they represent steps in our awakening, we will see next time. The fourth verse, now this is the indication of that. As is this flash of the lightning upon us, or as is this falling of the eyelid, so in that which is of the gods. Verse 5, then in that which is of the self, as the motion of this mind seems to attain to that, and by it afterwards, the will in the thought continually remembers it. And what is this that? Verse 6. The name of that is that delight. As that delight, one should follow after it. He who so knows that, towards him verily all existences yearn. So we've read the text, we have a sense of where it is going, and now we will see how Sri Aurobindo describes this movement, which is the culmination of the chapter we are now reading, where he describes how all three parts in our being have to turn to be able to reflect and manifest that. But as a result, what happens? And the next chapter is called The Transfiguration of the Self and the Gods. Everything begins to change. These very things which are now limited in their egoistic, narrow bound working, as they open and begin to reflect her action, she prepares the ground for the reflection and the expression of the Lord. Everything here begins to transform. There is a complete change in the working of these very powers, which were so far struggling in evolution. The powers awake to their diviner aspect, and the whole evolution undergoes a shift. And that is the next chapter, which we will continue on next Sunday. For now, we can read a few of these lines and meditate on the deeper sense that we have been dwelling upon. But Indra does not turn back from the quest like Agni and Vayu. He pursues his way through the highest ether of the pure mentality. And there he approaches the woman, the many shining Uma, Haimavati. From her he learns that this demon is the Brahman, by whom alone the gods of mind and life and body conquer and affirm themselves, and in whom alone they are great. Uma is the supreme nature from whom the whole cosmic action takes its birth. She is the pure summit and highest power of the one who here shines out in many forms. From this supreme nature, which is also the supreme consciousness, the gods must learn their own truth. They must proceed by reflecting it in themselves instead of limiting themselves to their own lower movement. For she has the knowledge and consciousness on, while the lower nature of mind, life, and body can only envisage the many. Therefore, although Indra, Vayu, and Agni are the greatest of the gods, yet it is only by entering into contact with the supreme consciousness and reflecting its nature, and by the elimination of the vital, mental, physical egoism, so that their whole function shall be to reflect the one and supreme, that Brahman can be known by the gods in us and possessed.